Good evening, and thank you for joining the New York Jewish Week and UJA Federation of New York for our monthly Folio literary series. I'm Thea Wieseltier, Director of Public Programs at 70 Faces Media, the parent company of the New York Jewish Week. Tonight, we're delighted to welcome author Judy Batalion and present her debut novel, The Last Woman of Warsaw, which explores the vibrant world of interwar Warsaw, a city known as the Paris of the North, filled with theaters, cabarets, and a thriving cultural scene. Warsaw was a key city of the diaspora, all to be destroyed in a few short years. Our partner, UJA Federation of New York, knows the importance of telling and retelling the stories of the Holocaust. Not just what happened, but all that we need to learn from in order to say never again. UJA supports survivors in their last days with dignity and comfort, acknowledges and commemorates Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, annually, invests in witness theater, pairing high school students with Holocaust survivors who share their stories and perform them before an audience. To learn more about UJA's work, please visit their website. The link is in the chat. And now I turn it to Judy and Andrew to start our program. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Thea, and good evening. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to Judy again. Last time we spoke was a couple of years ago about her acclaimed nonfiction bestseller, The Light of Days, which tells the extraordinary story of Jewish women resistance fighters in Nazi-occupied Poland, and it helped bring wider attention to that little-known chapter of Holocaust history. The story continues in a sense. Judy can explain how in her new novel, The Last Woman of Warsaw, richly imagined work of historical fiction set in 1938 Warsaw on the eve of catastrophe. Judy, I want to welcome you to the Folio, and I'm really excited to talk about your book.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be back talking to you.
So let's talk about how someone who's who goes from nonfiction to fiction. Why did you feel the story had to be told as fiction instead of another book about that era, drawing on your research?
Yeah, that's a great question. Why did I do this as fiction?
Mm-hmm.
Sound a bit like my agent. He's like, what? Okay, I'll have to give you some context a little bit. So my last book, The Light of Days, you were mentioning, was about young Jewish women and teenage girls who fought the Nazis and who fought them primarily from the ghettos in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
There were young Jewish women who ran underground soup kitchens and schools and secret printing presses, all the way through to young Jewish women who shot Gestapo men in the head, who blew up Nazi supply trains, who flung Molotov cocktails in ghetto uprisings, who were couriers pretending to be Christian, crisscrossing the country, transporting information, medical supplies, weapons. And as I was writing that book, and after writing that book, I really began to ask myself, what kind of world created these women? What kind of society nurtured such daring, audacious, smart, and frankly stylish young Jewish women? There was something like, what was 1930s Poland like? It didn't jive with my image of what I had thought 1930s Poland was. To me, Warsaw always conveyed an image. Decay, rubble.
Mm-hmm.
It has the word war in its name, that's very kind of gray and heavy. And for Polish Jewry, I don't know, I had imagined really Fiddler on the Roof, a kind of Anatevka experience, religious shtetl communities. And as soon as I really started to look into this period, I was wrong. I was totally wrong. Mm-hmm. And that sense of how could I not know this drove me to write this story. Now I will come to finally answer your question, which was why as fiction? So First, let me start by saying I've been writing fiction for a long time. It wasn't a completely new endeavor. I have digital drawers filled with, unpublished novellas and short stories and drafts of novels. And I've written some screenplays and I was pitching some TV stuff. So it wasn't entirely new. But some of the reason was pragmatic. Some of it was creative. On a practical side, The Light of Days came out in early 2021. We've kind of purposefully forgotten that time, but we were really in the throes of a pandemic.
Mhm.
There weren't even vaccines. We were just starting with vaccines. So it wasn't a time where I could go to Poland and find a new story. I couldn't even go to the Center for Jewish History down my street and find new research. Everything was shut. And so I didn't have, I had done so much research for The Light of Days. I knew I had more stacks in my own apartment. And I felt like, but I was obsessed with a setting with Warsaw in this time in particular. And so I thought, I don't have a story, so I'll make up a story. But I tried to really base this book in historical figures and in research. And also, I think writing creatively, after writing The Light of Days, which had 73 pages of endnotes. Don't worry, it's a fast read, but that was like select endnotes. I mean, I knew I was presenting a new version of the Holocaust. And so I was so obsessively careful that everything be cited and proven as best as I could. I think I felt like I wanted a bit of freedom to be able to really indulge in the setting and in the characters and make up some dialogue and make up what they were thinking, which I wasn't able to do before.
So the book follows two young Jewish women from very different worlds, although it's Warsaw, but from different classes, different social milieu. So were there particular pieces of research or particular women's stories that really were important to you? Based on a real story, that kind of thing.
So the book is, I'll just explain. So the book is really the story of an unlikely and I think powerful friendship between two very different young Jewish women. There's Fanny, who's a feisty fashion photographer, and Zosia, who's a more serious political activist, a leader in the labor Zionist youth movement. And they're thrown together to find a third character who is a missing mentor of theirs. And all this takes place in this sophisticated, fashionable Warsaw in 1938. And all those characters were based on my years of reading memoirs of the women who were resistance fighters during the Holocaust, but also their memoirs often contained stories of the years before the war. And so I used bits of many, many lives and constructed these composite characters out of many different anecdotes and characteristics.
So you talked about stylish, and I think that might be surprising, as it was to you, to many of our viewers, trying to remember a Warsaw that wasn't, like you said, the Warsaw of black and white photographs, grim. So maybe it's time for us to look at some of those images I think you've brought to get an idea of what this Warsaw looked like and how it shaped the story you told.
Sure. So we can share images. Next slide, please. So Warsaw in 1938 was a cultural hub. It was a place of vaudeville, cabaret, nightclubs with revolving dance floors. Cafe culture was a big part of Warsaw life. There's a lot of intellectual and artistic discussion that went on in the cafes. Next image. Here, this is just giving you a bit of an overview. This is the Jewish quarter. Jews, by the way, were about 30% of the population of Warsaw in the mid-late 30s.
30%. Wow. Okay.
Oh, and this is a street corner, and I kind of liked this image always, because you see some people are dressed quite modern and some people are in more traditional garb. And part of what I wanted to do by taking these two characters from such different worlds was to show the diversity of the Jewish community. It wasn't all that religious shtetl Fiddler on the Roof that I had imagined. There were religious Jews and very assimilated Jews. There were poor Jews and wealthy Jews. There were Jews of many different political persuasions as well. And I wanted in my work to show that diversity. Next slide. Okay, so Warsaw. Okay. Before Las Vegas, Warsaw was the capital of neon signs.
Mm.
I mean, this really shocked me. I didn't know that. I think I have another slide. The next one, please. Yeah, this was, again, scenes of Warsaw nightlife, downtown Warsaw in the 30s. This is what it looked like. Next slide. These are inside, so there were nightclubs. They wrote a lot about I think I mentioned they have revolving dance floors, but they were made of rubber in case anyone should slip. And I read many things about, going out at night and the shows that were presented in the nightclubs, the dancing. This is a photo from the Adria, which was one of the biggest, sort of most fashionable nightclub. It had a whole interior, like jungle area with trees and a forest. Next slide, please. Just showing you a bit more. I became obsessed with the fashion, as I'd been explaining to you before, and I loved finding pictures of the coats, cafe culture. There were telephones. Not everyone had a phone, but there were phones. Traffic lights were new, and they were in Warsaw. Oh, yeah, no, you can go on. This is some bizarre show. I don't even know what it is, but it's from the nightclub scene in the late 30s. It inspired one of the scenes in the book when Fanny is with a man at the nightclub watching some. I don't know what's going on here with the monkey, but some tomfoolery.
There's a monkey. I didn't even notice.
And here are, okay, so I found, I think hundreds of photos of fashion shows that took place in Warsaw at this time. And there was actually a dedicated place called the Fashion Cafe, the Art and Fashion Cafe. This was in the back of the Fashion Cafe. They had a sort of runway that was used for regular fashion showings. This is a fashion show that was set up at the Warsaw Boating Club. And this is just a sample to me. I described this dress in the book because it just felt so modern and so, I don't know, relatable to me as a piece of clothes. It looks like my wedding dress a little bit. And finally, this is one of my favorite photos I found. There was a lot, women, we can come back, but there was a lot of sports in Poland at the time. Women participated in sports. They had rowing teams. They were very big and they skied. There was a ski culture in Poland, in the Carpathian Mountains, many resorts. In fact, there was a luxury train that took families between the different resorts. And one of the cars had a restaurant. One of the cars had a cinema showing all the new American movies. And this was from a fashion show of ski wear. When I came across it, I just thought this looks avant-garde now. It really just wasn't in any way what I thought of as pre-war Warsaw. We could keep going. A swim class. There are many beaches in Poland as well. This is from, I think, 2930, a little earlier. And I think is the next image one of the, I can keep going. I don't know if you want me to keep talking, but
maybe we can come back to them.
We can come back.
I want to ask another question about, so that's one aspect of Poland, the cultural aspect, modern, Parisian in a sense, right? They call it the Paris of Eastern Europe and all.
North, yeah.
What's happening politically, though? Because I think one thing that surprised me about your book was that I realized how little I knew about Warsaw, Poland, actually, before the war. What's happening? Is it a place where Jews are feeling their oats, they're comfortable, or are there ominous things happening that predate the Nazis?
All right, so Polish history in a nutshell. So it's hard because there was so much I didn't know as
Mhm.
well. And by the way, all four of my grandparents were born, raised, and grew up as young adults in Poland, in Warsaw as well. And
Yeah,
I knew none of this.
right.
Um, so in terms of if you're asking me about Poland in general, but you want to focus on the anti-Semitism in particular?
I guess because I mean there's some key scenes, we'll talk about the ghetto benches, which is
Okay.
when and again that wasn't, these are discriminatory laws in Poland that are not imposed by the Nazis, but there is a far right in Poland that comes into power well before the Nazis show up, right?
Well, what happens is, okay, Poland is a new country after World War I. It hadn't been a country since the 1790s. There's an attempt at democracy, and it doesn't work. There's a coup, and this authoritarian leader takes over. His name's Pilsudski, Joseph Pilsudski.
Hmm.
And by most accounts, not all, but he's tolerant, friendly with the Jewish community. So there's a sense of trust and safety among the community. And I'll also just throw in the statistic because I think it's important that Jews were, I said, 30% of Warsaw and of cities, but there were 10% of the whole country.
Hmm.
It's an enormous, it's like New York now, but that is of all of Poland. So it was a really large minority. Pilsudski dies in 1935, which is also around the time that you're getting increasing Nazi influences coming from Germany. And when he dies, it leaves a power vacuum. And suddenly, a lot of the more right-wing parties are taking over. They're gaining power and gaining control. There are tons of elections. There's all kinds of election and voting systems. I can't even follow it. Even the Jewish community had their own government. But my understanding is they're all rigged. They're not true elections. It's not a true democracy. And these very far right parties are gaining more and more power. And they are promoting a pure Poland, a nationalist version of Poland. They don't want the minorities. The Jews must leave. And because of that, there's increasing legislation that discriminates against the Jewish community. Like you can't have ritual slaughter, kosher meat. There's a lot of rules and then pushback around that. And there are rules about discrimination in professions. Jews are suddenly not allowed to be in government positions. So doctors can't work in public hospitals. They're thrown out of the unions, doctor and lawyer unions, and Jewish population made up a huge percent of the doctors and lawyers in Poland. And at universities, and here I'm finally coming back to answer your question, a lot of this ends up playing out on university campuses. So from 1935, there's something called the ghetto bench rule, or it's not a rule because it didn't come from the Polish government, but universities sort of had the power to initiate this on their, each university could decide. And from 35 through to 39, this becomes an increasing practice where it's a segregated seating policy where Jewish students have to sit in a particular bench in the classroom.
Mm.
There are other rules that come up. Jewish students are no longer allowed to dissect Christian cadavers. So it becomes impossible to go to medical school. There are quotas put on, in particular in the professional fields, engineering, the sciences, medicine, on Jewish students and on professors. So there are also riots. There are violent riots at the universities. There was someone killed in an admissions office. University of Warsaw actually had to shut down for a little while because it got so heated. And to some degree, the ghetto benches were a conciliatory, well, if you back off on attacking the Jews, we'll make them sit in their own bed. It was a part of a kind of compromise. This became a plot point in the book, which, by the way, I wrote that plot point and that draft in 2021, well before seeing rise in anti-Semitism on university campuses here. So.
Mhm. So I want to talk about the Jewish reaction to what's happening here, and maybe let's do it through the way your main characters react. Zosia, as no, I'm going to get it right. Who joins? Who's part of Drawer?
Zosia. Zosia.
Zosia. So tell us about that. She's part of Drawer is a labor Zionist. Tell us what they stood for and how they operated, but also kind of what's the climate of resistance, Jewish pride, Jewish self-help. They're the Zionists. I'm sure they're anti-Zionist. What's happening at this point among the Jews as they're facing this kind of squeeze of anti-Semitic activity?
Oh, that's like a 20-part question and a 3-hour.
Why don't we focus on Drawer? Because I think it's fascinating, and then we could talk maybe like what the climate is.
So like overall, there's many different political views in Poland at the time. What do we do? Mm-hmm. Is this and just another phase of anti-Semitism, or is this really bad? Do we need to leave? So Drawer and the labor Zionist movement, which had, I'll come back to this, it had its kind of heyday a bit earlier, late 20s, 30s. This was a homeland movement that Jews, this was, first of all, secular, interested in Jewish history, Jewish culture, but not religious. It was also socialist. It was about community collaboration. They read psychoanalysis, they read psychology. They talked very sat in circles, talked about how we can best collaborate, how we can best work together as a community, as a group. They're also egalitarian to some degree. Mm-hmm. Women were leaders in these groups. I always say women in interwar Poland were educated, they were emancipated, and they were employed. And I can come back and talk more about that, but in Drawer itself, women were leaders, which is why my character Zosia and many of the women I wrote about in The Light of Days were leaders in the labor Zionist movement. And it was a homeland movement. These people wanted to go to Eretz Israel and in British Mandate Palestine and create a Hebrew-speaking, socialist, kibbutz-based society. And there were kibbutzim they set up throughout Poland where they went to learn to work the land. The values were, self-sufficiency, taking responsibility for our community, for ourselves, for our future, learning how to make decisions, how to act. And many of those people went on to be the resistance fighters that I wrote about in The Light of Days.
Mm-hmm. And without giving away any plot points, it's not so easy to just pick up and buy a ship ticket and go to Palestine. There's paperwork, there's bureaucracy, there's permissions.
You need to get a visa. So this is part of a British plan to create a Jewish homeland, and there were visas that were distributed. After 1935, the visas became more limited. And so this put a lot of strain on the movement because it was a movement sort of training for immigration, and then the immigration was stopping. And this was depressing as well for many of the youth, and they felt like we don't have a way out of here. They were trying to find ways to create Jewish pride and dignity in any case.
Mm-hmm. So then you also have a character, photographer, moneyed, a socialite of sorts. What's happening in her family, and what do they represent in terms of their reaction to what Poland is and what they're worried that it's going to become?
So while Zosia is actually from a shtetl and a poor and more religious family, that she leaves that to be in the labor Zionist movement. Fanny is the opposite in many ways. She's from a very assimilated and wealthy Warsaw family. Her parents are divorced, it wasn't common, but it did happen. And it was based on a true story that someone told me, and I sort of liked that. Her family is, they're members of the synagogue in Warsaw, the fancy synagogue where the inscriptions are in Polish. And the synagogue is used as a concert hall for classical concerts. That's when you get most people there. And they, in the way the book works, they feel comfortable in Poland. I mean, literally, Fanny walks through Warsaw as if she owns it. And I think Zosia walks through Warsaw a little as a maybe an unwanted guest, a little, or feeling like one. And Fanny comes from a family that yes, and this is coming also from many of the accounts that I read. Yes, Jews, we've lived here for 1,000 years. There have been periods of worse anti-Semitism and better anti-Semitism. Like it shifts, it moves, like it's gonna be okay. This too shall pass.
I want to remind our viewers is good. Now's a chance if you want to if you want to ask a question of Judy, use the Q&A. And if you drop them there, I'll try to get to the ones that we get, and as many as I can. So, put your questions in the Q&A. And there's one there that actually it's a good question about the cultural life we talked about. Are there any restrictions on Jews in terms of those kinds of professions, whether it's fashion or theater or nightclubs? Do they have to create their own alternative, like Second Avenue Yiddish Theater, or were they integrated into the cultural life of Greater Warsaw?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I don't have statistics like how many people were able to. There was kind of this idea that a lot of times the Jews worked backstage. And so they were the writers, they were the composers. And and this is in the more, the grander or more Polish of the Polish venues. The Poles, the Christian Poles were the performers on stage. There was very strong Jewish entertainment life. So Jewish comedians, Jewish vaudeville, Yiddish theater, there were Yiddish theater productions in 400 towns across Poland. And they're doing original Yiddish plays, but also Shakespeare, Moliere, Eugene O'Neill in Yiddish throughout Poland. So there was tremendous amount of theater and literature that was within the Jewish community. There was, in fact, there was a type of show called a schmonsis, and it was an entire genre of show that made fun of assimilated Jews.
Now there's a scene in the book that's kind of pivotal, and it's set in a nightclub. Tell me a little bit about that, because I think you said that was based on an actual performance.
So I think you're referring to it was to the Jigen and Schumacher show. So this is actually based on a true story, almost taken, and it was one of the first, I think it's the first scene I wrote when I sat down it's not at the beginning of the book now, but when I sat down to do this project, I wrote the scene first. Jigen and Schumacher were a Yiddish comedy duo. I grew up, my dad was a huge Jigen and Schumacher fan. I grew up listening to them in the background. They were Polish comedians. They had their own theater production in Warsaw. And in 1939, I moved the date in the novel, but in 1939, they did a show. It was, I think it was May of 1939. It was called The Last Jew in Poland. And the premise of the sketch, it was a sketch show, but the main sketch of the show was that Poland was telling, we want the Jews out. We want to get rid of the Jews, as I had been explaining before, was the discourse among many of these right-wing parties. And so the Jews leave Poland. Again, this is their sketch. And suddenly the Poles, the Christian Poles, are like, uh-oh, wait a second. What happened to all our culture? What happened to all our composers and all the songs and all the music and all the theater and the economy? And there's one Jew who's a bit of a schmendrick, a bit like, and he was late with his packing to leave Poland. So he's still like packing stuff up, and they find him and they're like, you can't leave. We need to keep our Jews. And they're whining and dining him and trying to convince him to stay. He's the last Jew in Poland, and he's a yutz, but they need this Jew. And they performed this in spring 1939. And and they got in trouble with the government for doing the show.
So The Last Jew in Warsaw, it sounds very similar to the title of your book. So maybe tell us about the title of your book.
So I can't even really remember the moment I knew the title of the book, but it came from The Last Jew in Warsaw. And I think I kind of threw it out in passing, and it just stuck. Normally, I can't find titles, and everyone's mad at me, and we fight, and the publisher doesn't like anything. But this, it just stayed from like right from the beginning. I think there's something a little ominous about it. And also maybe who is the last woman of Warsaw?
And it's singular, the last woman, as opposed to women in Warsaw.
And
you made brief reference before to your own family history. First of all, did your grandparents, parents, great grandparents, or any from Warsaw? And what were their memories, and how did they kind of shape your approach to the topic?
so my grandparents, so as I mentioned, all four of my grandparents were born and raised in Poland. In fact, I once I was in Poland at a very hip cafe in Krakow with all kinds of Polish publishing people. And they were like, wait, all four of your grandparents are from Poland? You're more Polish than any of us. Which in a weird way, I am I? So they left, sorry, I got sidetracked by my own question about, am I Polish or am I not? Am I the last woman of Warsaw? We're asking what my family, were they from? Yes. So they weren't born in Warsaw, but they all spent all four of my grandparents spent their young adulthoods. They eventually moved to Warsaw, like people would move to New York, you'd move to the big city. And my father always used to tell the story that when his mother went to New York for the first time in, I guess, the 50s, maybe the early 60s, she came and said, this place is quite something, but it's no Warsaw. And this was kind of a joke. Like we laughed about that. It's no Warsaw. It's no Warsaw. I didn't understand what she meant until I started to do this kind of research and realize that it wasn't a joke. I mean, she really missed the incredible cultural energy of Warsaw.
Before we came on, my colleague Thea Wieseltier was talking about this being also the story of her own relatives who came out of this same fashionable world, cosmopolitan, sophisticated before everything changed. Have you been hearing that as you tour around, that people are coming up to you and saying, hey, this is my family story too?
Well, first of all, my family wasn't we were not aristocratic. My family was
not
we weren't that sophisticated, but actually my family was more middle class than I ever knew.
Okay.
I didn't even realize until like last year that my maternal grandfather was actually from quite a upper middle class family. I didn't know that. Yes, I found the book. I've been doing a lot of events this week, and people have been coming up to me. Thinking of one event I did, a woman, she with a picture of her grandmother on her phone and being like, this is my gorgeous, fashionable grandmother from Warsaw. Judy, I finally, I didn't understand the world she came from. It didn't make sense that she was into and yes, this makes sense now. And a number of people have been like, oh yeah, my grandmother also was trying to start a boutique. Oh, I've heard this a few times. My mother went to Paris and bought some supplies and came back to sell hats in Warsaw, and it didn't. And yeah, it feels like I hope it's resonating with people and helping for me, just shed a bit of light on where I come from.
Mm-hmm. Did you go to Warsaw to research the book?
I did.
And what's left? I don't even know.
I went to Warsaw actually to research the Light of Days. So I spent some time there a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's now, it's actually a really nice city. It's been totally rebuilt.
I mean, yeah.
It was completely destroyed. It's interesting to walk around Warsaw. Someone like me that's trying to do historical research, I had to use two maps. One of them is on my phone, the current Google map of central Warsaw, and one of them is the historical map of what the streets were, because even the streets weren't reconstructed on the same places. So it's confusing. It was totally destroyed. And it's a completely rebuilt city. In fact, the old city, which is the kind of medieval Warsaw, has been rebuilt to look exactly like it was, with a castle. And it's strange because it's been totally rebuilt.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it's very pretty. It's great restaurants, a very green city. I have a very complicated feelings about it.
Mm-hmm. Someone asked, more than two people actually asked in the questions, about kind of, there's institutional anti-Semitism and there's kind of social anti-Semitism. How much of the latter did Jews face? Were they well integrated with their neighbors, or were they really kind of double societies, where Jews, kept to their own, and as well as as Gentiles kept to their own?
I mean, there was a very big Jewish quarter in Warsaw, which had a concentration of Jewish restaurants, synagogues. I have the number somewhere, like some insane number. Jewish schools, but Jews lived all over Warsaw. They
Mm-hmm.
weren't confined to this area. It's hard, people ask me this sometimes. It's hard to quantify personal anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
The sense that my sense is that, like, yes, it existed, and there were some attacks, in particular in smaller towns. But for the most part, everyone, they kind of made it work. It
Mm-hmm.
was, and my understanding as well is that the intellectual class was very, very pro-Jewish. They're very involved with Jewish people. Like, there was the intellectual class was very generous, or very open and very integrated. The Jews were very integrated with that in that class.
Mm-hmm. This is a small question, but I guess I can't tell because your book's in English. Fanny's family, upper class, moneyed. Are they Yiddish speakers?
No, they spoke Polish.
Huh.
And it's something
Would they have known Yiddish?
no, Fanny didn't really know Yiddish.
Interesting. Okay.
So, but she was an outlier. So I don't know I don't think I mentioned this when I was talking about Warsaw. Warsaw had, in the 30s, 180 Jewish publications, newspapers, magazines, periodicals. 130 were in Yiddish, and you had 25 in Hebrew and 25 in Polish, roughly. Many Jews spoke many languages. Yiddish, and like back and forth, Yiddish, Hebrew, Polish, but also German, Russian. Fanny studied French, Hungarian if you were closer to that, Czech if you were closer to that. They were so linguistically sophisticated in that way, and they flip back and forth. And it was something I thought about in the book, because do I need to indicate every time people are speaking to each other if they were speaking Polish or Yiddish or Hebrew? And I did not do that because I thought it was too jarring for a reader. But sometimes I have to mention it because they're playing up a certain accent or a certain way of speaking. But they would have spoken numerous languages. And Fanny spoke, oh, sorry.
Okay. There's another aspect I found interesting. I think this is also based on a historical character. You mentioned the mentor, the woman that both women kind of, it drives the plot. They're obsessed with finding a teacher who is who goes missing. She's an avant-garde photographer, based on a real person or a composite?
She's a composite. So I needed I based her a little bit on someone in the light of days who I wrote about briefly. Her name was Mirgola. She was someone who had been in the labor Zionist movement, but she was so left-wing they had actually had to throw her out because she was too communist. And she ended up joining more left-wing movements like that. But she was also a poet.
Mhm.
And she had been a poet in, a published poet in Poland. And so because I was using photography in this story, I made the character a photographer who is also a very left-wing activist.
Another question from the Q&A, which is, it says, if the intellectuals were accepting of the Jews, why did the universities become anti-Semitic? And maybe this is a bigger question. Like, why would you would think maybe the universities of all places would be a place of enlightenment, but why do you think they became a battleground at this
So,
time?
so actually, when the ghetto benches were enforced at Warsaw University, a lot of academics spoke out against it. And they wrote letters, and there were even academics in America and in England that also they got on board and they did fight it. Um, so I think it was a mix. Is the administration not and there were political, like I was saying, a lot. The ghetto bench was a sort of politics of appeasement type of. There was all these groups that didn't want Jews at all in the universities, and this was sort of well, we'll just make them sit in their own area. Um, and look, there was some people were anti-Semitic and some weren't, like in any situation. But it was the student groups that were the ones influenced a lot by Nazi ideology
Mhm.
that were protesting that they didn't want Jews to enroll alongside them in school.
Mhm. Even before the invasion, or the
Yes. Yes, this is
those kinds of influences were coming through, that
yes.
this kind of hyper nationalism was becoming.
Yes, there were groups called the Green Ribbons, and they wore a green ribbon. And these were youth groups that were anti-Jewish youth groups.
Huh, okay, that's really fascinating. Um, Tell me about the importance of telling women's stories. You've done this now in two books. Um, and why is that important to you, and what does it add to our understanding of this period?
I mean, I think it's important to me personally because I'm a woman and I'm
Mhm.
and I'm looking, I'm looking for something. I'm looking for I I lived with my maternal grandmother. She raised me, and I don't know anything about her life in Poland.
Mhm.
Nothing. I know nothing. And so I think partly I feel some duty to, on a personal level, to find out who my ancestors were, who my matriarchs are. I come from that. So who were these people? And I really hope that these stories can inspire. I mean, I'm writing about dark periods.
Mhm.
Eh, This is, unavoidable, but I really also hope that I'm able to inspire people with these stories, that these were young women who were, I mean, fighters for justice and liberty and dignity. And they were smart and bold, and I hope they can be models for us. And also, um, I think sometimes like I did a PhD in art in women's art history, and there was this kind of idea that like feminism started in California in the 1960s, and that's not really true. Maybe modern feminism in a sort of way, but women, I was saying before, women in Poland, it was a very progressive moment for women. They were educated, they worked, they had kids, they married later. Um, they they dressed it, they wore bright lipstick and fitted blazers and cool clipped hair. They were very involved in sports. Women in Poland had the vote before most Western countries.
Hmm.
It was a very they went to university. Education was mandatory for boys and girls through 8th grade. It was a time that I think is inspiring as well.
What responsibility do you feel, especially writing fiction, in terms of getting the story right and not kind of distorting in any way? I mean, a complaint about some Holocaust novels is that because they often focus on the survivors, they're uplifting in a way that it's not an uplifting story. When you were writing this, what kind of weight did you feel on your shoulders?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and this was very difficult for me, because I told you before, I've written all kinds of fiction. I was even earlier last year pitching, really zany animation set in like Boston in the 1800s with a chain smoking ghost woman. Anyways, sometimes in historical projects, it doesn't matter that much. You have details of the time to because it's interesting or to give it a feel. But here I was writing about a period that I had just spent the previous like decade footnoting. And it's not about the Holocaust, but it's, very close to the Holocaust. And it relies on real world events. I wanted to tell people about Poland in the 1930s. So the real world is an important part of this kind of story. So I was very, very anxious about what I was allowed to change. What can you change? And I wanted people to understand what Poland was like, but I couldn't. You have to move things around because otherwise it'll be like a 35,000 page book. So I did, in the end, after much anxiety, I did change some of the dates a little bit, and I changed to bring everything into a closer time period. And I changed the date of the ghetto bench institution in Warsaw by a couple of months. And I put some stories from Vilna into Warsaw and some stories from Warsaw into Vilna. And don't worry, I put a note at the end all about how I did this. So it made me feel a little less guilty. Well, I always say once a neurotic historian, always a neurotic historian. But I really I tried to keep the things based in history to be feel as real and as true as possible. In order, and be able to tell a story that wasn't all over the place and spanned 10 years.
We just have not really questions, but just a few people are commenting. I think they're picking up on something you said about your grandmother. You didn't know her story or she didn't talk about it. Someone says, I shared a room growing up with my Oma, whom I loved, but sadly did not know very much about her life during the war. She was in Theresienstadt with my mother. I was at a screening last night of a film where I think one of the characters said, not characters, one of the subjects said, there were two kinds of survivors, the ones who talked about it and the ones who just never talked about it. You had 4 survivor relatives. Were the stories told in your family, or it was shtetl, as we say in Yiddish?
So I should say my father's parents actually left Poland before the war. Also due in large part for anti-Semitic reasons. And my mother's parents were survivors, and my mother was born in 1945 on their run from the Nazis. No, my family didn't talk about it. They talked like it would come up in I don't know, a moment of hysteria. My grandmother would talk about, oh, her sister, how could she was so traumatized by having lost her younger sisters. And once in a while, like a very emotional outpouring would come out of her about how she used to go swimming with her sister. But that was it. It was like a sentence, 2 sentences. And even the story of how they escaped Poland is something I've had to piece together from bits of anecdotes that don't even really entirely make sense historically. But no, no one ever sat me down and told me a story. No,
Mhm.
no, no. And my grandfather never talked about it. And my father's parents, his mother had left with her whole family, but my grandfather came with her family since they'd been married, and he left his family behind in Poland, and they were all murdered. And so he wasn't a Holocaust survivor, but that trauma of that he left and they were all killed, that hung over the family as well.
People are also picking up, I think, on something you said about the universities. You had written that before the, encampments post October 7th. Um, do you want the book to be read as, I don't know, a cautionary tale? Do you want it to reflect on kind of today's environment? Someone asks, they were very integrated into society at most levels, but to no avail. Did you feel a sense of caution in writing this and finding parallels between then and now?
You know, I drafted this in 2021. That's
Mhm.
real, so it's like a different political moment,
Mhm.
and I started to see these parallels play out in front of me, which was very troubling.
Mhm.
Um, is it a cautionary tale? I mean, a little bit, I guess, in the sense that I want people to understand that I think we have this tendency, or I do, I should say well, they were primitive, they were shtetl, they were anatevka.
Mhm.
We're sophisticated. But like, no, they were just like us. We're just like them. And yes, our world can collapse like theirs did. But I also hope to, again, inspire a little bit with characters who saw this or began to see this, who fought back, who understood their agency and their their power in small acts as well.
Mhm. We talked about some of the reactions. Have you heard from people who were either old enough to have firsthand or secondhand memories of Warsaw and say, like, Judy, you got it right, or I would have done something different?
Everyone would have done something different,
Or
they call me. Um, Not yet, but I'm waiting for that. I did borrow stories from certain people who are now in their 90s, late 90s, who I've talked to about their lives. So I'll let you know what their feedback is.
and here's a sort of a fast question: will the book be translated into Polish, as far as you know, or other languages?
No, not at the moment, not as far as I know.
Someone else also wants to know, where are you open for speaking to book groups?
Yes, sure.
So we'll say
Sure.
maybe
Be in touch. Be in touch. Yes.
maybe we can drop in the chat the your contact or your website, or so
Yeah,
people.
just go on my website. There's a contact form, and I actually get those messages, so you can use them.
Can we expect you to return to nonfiction? And are there still things you want to say about this period in history?
So I'll be honest, I think emotionally I need a little break from this period. Then again, that's what I've said every time, and I'm
Mhm.
always back with this period. Um, I actually have a very different book coming out at the end of this year. It's totally different. I don't even know what to tell you. It's a health book. It's co-writing it with someone a correspondent, my friend at NBC. We both have bowel disease, and it's
Mhm.
a personal humorous look at living with. So it's bowel disease. It's Jewish. It's not Jewish, but
Hey, it's the
definitely
most
Jewish.
Jewish topic of all.
Very different. And it was nice to actually, I'll tell you to write that at kind of alongside this because that's funny. I was able to be funny. It has a lot of like one-liners and things. So I always need to balance it out.
Mhm. And finally, I just want to ask, when readers read your book, put it aside, and what ultimately what do you want them to think about, in terms of how do you want to remember this community that was so vibrant and was lost to us and exists only in memories and books like yours and nonfiction? What do you hope people walk away and think?
I mean, one thing I didn't say before, when I think about what I was doing with this book, I think to some degree I was trying to say Kaddish for a lost world of Jewish imagination. Like, think of all the books and poetry and style and comedy and songs that we just won't know.
Hmm.
And I felt like I wanted to take a moment to explore that, celebrate that, and mourn that at the same time.
Well, if folks want to dip into this world, immerse themselves in this world, you can read The Last Woman of Warsaw by Judy Batalion. I want to thank Judy for being our guest tonight and enlightening us on this amazing and fascinating period of Jewish life. I want to thank our partners at UJA Federation, who helped sponsor this Folio series, and my colleagues at 70 Faces Media, Beryl Bessemer and Thea Wieseltier for their support and their technical help. Judy, thanks so much. And again, you can look at the link to find out where to get the book, and I know you'll enjoy it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.